She didn't scream, didn't flinch, just sat there as hot coffee soaked her blouse, poured by a cop in broad daylight. At first, the cafe stayed silent, but by 10:45 a.m., the world was watching. What happened next sparked protests, reforms, and exposed a city's darkest truths. Want to know how one quiet woman started a firestorm? Watch now. Like, share, and subscribe for stories that don't look away. Ever. At 8:13 a.m. on a Thursday morning, the Morning Light Café hummed with its usual rhythm. Espresso machines steaming, soft jazz drifting from old speakers, and the familiar clatter of ceramic cups against saucers. It was the kind of place where people didn't just drink coffee. They claimed corners. Locals knew the booths by heart. The third from the window, beneath a sun-faded painting of Ridgeview Lake, belonged to Alma Bryant. Always had. For the past 6 years, every Monday and Thursday, Alma arrived at the exact same time, wearing quiet shoes and a pressed blouse, with a small leather notebook tucked under her arm. A retired librarian and grandmother of 5, she was a woman of patterns, precision, and presence. Never flashy, never loud, but always noticed. Her nods were gentle, her words chosen. She greeted the barista with a kind, "Morning, sweetheart," stirred in one sugar, no cream, and took her seat by the window, where she'd watch the street like it held stories only she could read. But this morning would not unfold like the others. At 8:22, the bell above the cafe door jingled, sharp and out of place. In walked Officer Jake Penrose, broad-shouldered, silver-badged, and carrying the kind of confidence bred from unchecked power. He scanned the room not like a man seeking coffee, but like a man taking inventory of a space he believed was his. Jake wasn't new to Ridgeview. He'd been patrolling its streets for 12 years. He spoke in clipped sentences, smiled like it was a favor, and wore his badge as though it came with a gavel. The moment his eyes landed on Alma, something shifted. He walked toward her with a purpose too heavy for the room. "You mind moving, ma'am?" His voice was tight, polite on the surface, sharpened beneath. Alma looked up. "Pardon? That seat?" He gestured vaguely. "I usually sit there." Alma's brow furrowed slightly, calm. "I've been sitting here every Thursday for 6 years. The barista paused mid-pour. A young couple near the register stilled. And in the far corner, a 16-year-old boy with a camera around his neck lifted it instinctively, as if something ancient inside him had stirred. Malik Garner, a high school junior, amateur filmmaker, and frequent cafe loiterer. He didn't know what was about to happen, but he'd felt the air shift. Jake smiled, that thin sort of grin that means nothing good. "Guess it's time someone reminded folks how things work around here." And before anyone could move, before breath could even catch, he reached across the table, picked up Alma's steaming cup, and without hesitation, tilted it forward. The coffee cascaded down the front of her blouse, a thin, scalding river across beige cotton. Time stopped. There was no gasp, no apology, no outburst, just the hiss of hot liquid soaking into fabric and the distant clink of a spoon against porcelain. The cafe froze, not with fear, but with something colder. Recognition. Everyone saw it. Everyone knew what it was. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a joke. This was an assertion of control. A public degradation. Done with deliberation. Alma didn't flinch. She didn't cry out, or shield herself, or shove back. She just looked at him. Steady. Silent. The room waited for rage or fear. But what came was worse. For him. She stared through him. Not at his face, but at the idea of him. The type. The arrogance. The entitlement. The uniform wrapped around a wound too deep to name. It wasn't a reaction. It was a reckoning. Wordless, but louder than any shout. Jake blinked, confused, then irritated. "You gonna say something?" he asked. Alma calmly placed her now empty cup down, picked up a napkin, and dabbed her chest once, gently, as if brushing off dust rather than boiling liquid. "You've made a mistake," she said. Jake scoffed. "Oh yeah? You gonna call your son?" "I won't need to." Behind her, Malik didn't blink. He hadn't been filming before. But now he was capturing everything. The steam rising off her blouse, the glint of the badge, the stillness of the room. And then he panned his camera upward, just a bit, just enough to frame the corkboard above the cafe's door. Pinned there was a simple photo. A black man in uniform, firm posture, clear eyes. The caption beneath it read, "Welcome Chief Elijah Bryant, proudly raised by Alma Bryant." It hit like thunder in a cloudless sky. The barista finally moved, hands trembling. The young couple exhaled. Malik lowered the camera, breath shaking. Alma stood, slow and steady, her wet blouse clinging to her frame like armor. She walked out without another word. But the world was just beginning to speak. By 8:47 a.m., Malik had posted the video. No music, no edits, just raw footage. By 10:45, it had over 100,000 views. By 11:15, it was trending nationally. The title was simple, "She Didn't Flinch." But it wasn't just about a cup of coffee. It was about every unseen moment like it. Every silent assault. Every time power acted with impunity and expected no consequence. Coffee Cop wasn't a punchline, it was a siren. And Alma Bryant, without raising her voice, had become the epicenter of a storm. The Morning Light Café would never feel the same again. Not because of the coffee. Not even because of the silence. But because someone dared to think she didn't matter. And the whole world proved otherwise. Like, share, and subscribe to this channel for more stories that won't let you forget. This isn't just content. This is history. Being written. One truth at a time. By 9:12 a.m., the video had already crossed 12,000 views. The clip was just under a minute long, 58 seconds, to be exact. But it carried the weight of centuries. No music, no commentary, just raw footage. Officer Jake Penrose towering over a seated Alma Bryant, his hand casually tipping a steaming cup of coffee down her chest. The gasp the world expected never came. Neither did a scream. Alma never raised her voice. She simply looked at him, and that look became a mirror. For every viewer, it reflected something different. A mother, a grandmother, a neighbor, a woman who looked like someone they loved, and the man who thought he could violate her and walk away untouched. The caption under the video was simple, sharp, unforgettable. "She didn't yell, but we heard her anyway." By 10:24, it was on Facebook. By 10:51, it landed on Twitter. By 11:07, it was trending. Coffee Cop. What started as a whisper in a small-town cafe became a thunderclap across the country. Comments flooded in faster than anyone could read them. "This is my aunt." "This happened to my mom." "I've seen this before," and stayed quiet. Never again. Screenshots from the video surfaced next, paused mid-pour, with steam still rising. Others zoomed in on Alma's face, composed, soaked, powerful in her stillness. But what truly shattered the illusion of just another incident was the frame Malik's lens caught, unintentionally but with devastating clarity. Hanging just above the cafe door, behind Alma, was a modest corkboard filled with flyers and business cards. Pinned dead center, in pristine focus, was a framed welcome notice from the Ridgeview Police Department. "Meet our new police chief, Elijah Bryant. A son of this town, a leader for change, proudly raised by Alma Bryant. The internet exploded. By 11:45, Alma's name was trending alongside the hashtag. By noon, national outlets had begun calling it the Ridgeview Reckoning. Videos were reposted with duets, remixes, and reactions. On TikTok, a pastor from Georgia filmed himself praying over the image of Alma's face. A teacher in Seattle broke down mid-video describing her own mother's quiet strength. A retired nurse in Baltimore wrote, "We've been invisible too long. This is how we're seen." Within hours, Morning Light Café was surrounded. Not by sirens or barricades, but by people. Some came holding signs, some held cell phones, some just stood there, silent, like Alma had, reclaiming the space that had betrayed her. A chalkboard on the sidewalk now bore a message: "No justice without stillness." Inside the cafe, the barista who had stood frozen during the incident now spoke to reporters with trembling hands. "She comes in every Thursday," she said. "Never makes a fuss. Always smiles. I just didn't know what to do." She wasn't the only one. The cafe manager posted a statement within the hour, distancing the establishment from the officer and offering support to Alma. But the damage was already done. This wasn't just about a coffee shop. It was about what had always simmered beneath the surface in Ridgeview, and places like it. The moment had become a vessel, carrying generations of silence toward the shoreline of accountability. By 1:15, local news vans had parked along the curb. By 1:40, CNN was setting up. Across the country, the image of Alma, soaked in coffee but unwavering, flashed across television screens and home pages. Journalists scrambled for the connection. Who was Alma Bryant? What was her relationship to the police department? Was it true that the woman in the video had raised the man now tasked with cleaning the very system that had just assaulted her? The answer came swiftly, and it hit like lightning. At 1:47, the Ridgeview Police Department's website crashed under the weight of traffic. By 2:04, the department's Facebook page had been flooded with thousands of comments. People didn't want vague reassurances. They didn't want spin. They wanted accountability. Now. But inside the Ridgeview precinct, a storm had already begun to gather. Chief Elijah Bryant was in the middle of a strategy session with his senior staff when his assistant, voice shaking, entered the room holding her phone like it was made of fire. "You need to see this," she said. He watched the video once. That was enough. Elijah stood, silent, shoulders squared, jaw tight. He didn't speak, didn't curse, didn't ask for confirmation. He just walked out. By 2:25, his car pulled up outside the station. Reporters shouted his name, shoved microphones toward his face, asked if the rumors were true. He didn't answer. He walked straight through the front doors and into a building that had suddenly gone very quiet. He didn't go to his office. He went straight to the internal briefing room and called for Jake Penrose. Penrose arrived late, chewing gum, casual, as if none of this touched him. "Elijah," he said, offering a nod. "You needed something?" "Sit." Penrose hesitated, then smirked. If this is about the cafe thing, she was being uncooperative. I didn't hurt her. Elijah didn't look up from the printed still in his hands. Alma's face, centered and silent. "You poured coffee on a woman, a senior, a citizen, my mother." Silence. I didn't know who she was," Penrose stammered. "That's not the problem," Elijah replied, rising slowly. "The problem is, you didn't think she mattered." Penrose shifted, nervous now. "It's being blown out of—" She didn't raise her voice, Officer Penrose, but the world heard her anyway. By 3:02, Elijah had issued the order. Suspension, effective immediately, pending internal review. No press conference, no scripted statement. But the word got out. By 4:20, someone posted the footage of Penrose walking out of the station, head down. The crowd waiting outside didn't cheer. They didn't jeer. They simply stood, holding up their phones, filming history in real time. A young girl in the crowd held up a handmade sign. Justice wears silence too. By 5 o'clock, Alma's video had surpassed 1.2 million views. By 6:10, a New York Times op-ed appeared titled, "When the Quietest Voice Echoes the Loudest." By 7 p.m., national anchors were asking the same question across networks. How does a woman like Alma Bryant, composed, dignified, nearly invisible to the system, end up at the center of a national reckoning? And somewhere in Ridgeview, Alma sat at her kitchen table in the same coffee-stained blouse. She hadn't spoken since returning home. But she watched. And when a news segment showed the crowd gathered at Morning Light Café, she reached out, gently touched the screen, and exhaled. She hadn't yelled, but the world was yelling for her now, and it was only just beginning. At 2:17 p.m., Chief Elijah Bryant was halfway through a departmental strategy meeting, outlining patrol realignments for the upcoming Ridgeview Fall Festival, when his assistant stepped into the room, her face pale, her phone clutched like it was on fire. "Sir," she said, voice taut, "you need to see this." He took the phone without a word. One touch. A screen illuminated. A paused video. His mother. Soaked. Silent. Still. A uniformed officer, Penrose, looming above her. He pressed play. 58 seconds later, the room changed. The conversation, the papers on the table, the officers around him, all blurred into background noise. Elijah didn't speak. He didn't blink. He didn't even exhale until the final frame froze. The camera panning to the Morning Light Café bulletin board, the image of his own face smiling in a frame above the words, "Proudly raised by Alma Bryant." He handed the phone back without ceremony. "Meeting's over." "But, Chief—" He raised a hand, calm, precise, deliberate. "Clear the room." The command hit like a cold wind. No one argued. No one asked questions. Chairs scraped, files were gathered, and the senior staff filed out, casting backward glances filled with unease. Not because they feared Elijah's reaction, but because they knew he wouldn't perform one. He never did. That was what made him terrifying. By 2:23 p.m., he was in the hallway. His shoes echoed off tile like a countdown. He passed patrol units, admin staff, records officers. Conversations died in his wake. Phones rang, but no one answered. The precinct, normally humming with disjointed chatter, turned as quiet as a funeral home. Elijah didn't walk fast. He didn't need to. Every step was deliberate, every breath measured. Fury didn't race in his blood. It calcified in his bones, compressed beneath decades of practice. You don't get to be a black man leading a department like Ridgeview's without mastering the art of walking through fire without showing smoke. By 2:27, he reached the operations wing. He didn't knock on doors, didn't pause. He moved through the precinct like the building itself belonged to him. And in a way, it did. By 2:30, he entered the internal briefing room. "Bring me Officer Penrose," he said to Lieutenant Vera Shaw, who froze in place. "Chief, he just got off duty. He said he'd fill out a use of force report later." Elijah's jaw didn't move. "Now!" Shaw nodded once and picked up the internal line. 2 minutes later, Jake Penrose walked in, smug and oblivious, tossing a granola bar wrapper into the trash. "Someone call for me?" he said, like he was being summoned to a lunch shift. Elijah stood at the end of the long conference table, arms folded. "Sit!" Jake's smirk faltered just slightly. "Is this about the video?" he asked, taking a seat with forced casualness. "I didn't hurt her, Chief. It wasn't even—" Elijah didn't speak. Not yet. He reached into a folder and pulled out a printed still from the footage. It was Alma's face, centered in the frame, coffee darkening her blouse. Not crying, not flinching, just staring through the man who'd tried to humiliate her. Elijah slid the photo across the table. Jake blinked. "Chief, I didn't know who she was." "That," Elijah said quietly, "is not the problem." Jake shifted. It looked worse than it was." Elijah finally looked him in the eyes. And for the first time in Jake Penrose's 12-year career, he felt something he never had in uniform. Fear. "You poured coffee on a woman," Elijah said, voice like glass. "A senior citizen, in a public space, with witnesses, with intent." Jake's bravado cracked. "She was being difficult. I asked her to move, and when she said no, you humiliated her, deliberately, for the sake of dominance, because you could." Jake opened his mouth to protest, but Elijah cut him off. "You didn't know she was my mother," he said. "But that's not why you're here. You're here because you didn't think she mattered. Because she was an older black woman sitting in your way, and you assumed that meant she could be moved. Erased." Jake's hands twitched on the table. Are you firing me?" "No," Elijah said. "I'm suspending you. Effective immediately. Pending full investigation by Internal Affairs and oversight by the new Civilian Review Board." Jake shot to his feet. "This is political." "This," Elijah said, rising with calm that chilled the air, "is overdue." Jake sneered, trying to summon the confidence he wore like cologne. "You're just doing this because it's personal." Elijah stared at him for a long, cold moment, and then he said it. "This badge doesn't protect cowardice." Silence dropped like a hammer. By 2:54 p.m., Jake Penrose had been escorted from the premises, his badge and sidearm collected, his locker sealed. And for the first time since the footage went live, Ridgeview PD made a move that wasn't spin, but action. Outside, the crowd was growing. Quiet. Steady. Phones lifted. Signs raised. People standing shoulder to shoulder without speaking. Some held coffee cups with the lids off. Steam rising into the afternoon light, like prayers. At 3:11 p.m., Elijah stepped out through the precinct's front doors. He didn't call a press conference. He didn't bring notes. He simply walked to the steps, placed both hands on the railing, and looked out over a sea of faces. Angry, hopeful, tired, watching. "My name is Elijah Bryant," he said. "I serve this town as your chief of police, and today, one of my officers committed a public act of cruelty, not just against a citizen, against my mother." A few gasps, more silence. "She did not raise her voice," he continued, "but she didn't have to. The world raised it for her. I want everyone here to know. This is not being swept under a rug. We are not protecting anyone behind a badge who believes it's a shield for harm." He paused, breath steady. "Let me be clear. This badge," he tapped his chest, "does not protect cowardice. Not in this department. Not in my town." The silence that followed wasn't quiet. It was weight. It was witness. Phones filmed. Faces streamed tears. Someone clapped. Then another. Until the sound swelled. Not into a cheer, but into something heavier. Affirmation. Elijah didn't linger. He didn't take questions. He turned and walked back inside. But the story had already crossed the point of return. Inside the precinct, officers sat still, some staring at monitors, some staring at the floor. For years, they'd known Alma as Elijah's mama. Soft-voiced, steady-footed, always dropping off banana bread in Tupperware. No one imagined she'd be the catalyst for a reckoning. And yet, here they were. Elijah walked into his office, closed the door, locked it. He didn't sit. He opened the drawer in his desk and pulled out an old photo of his mother. Younger. Holding his hand at a protest line. Her eyes were the same. Wide, quiet, unyielding. He placed it on his desk, not as a memory, but as a reminder of who he was and who he had to be now. Because the world wasn't just watching anymore. It was listening, and it was waiting to see what truth would do next. By 4 o'clock that same afternoon, Chief Alma Bryant stood alone in the records room of Ridgeview Police Department. No cameras, no press, just the hum of fluorescent lights and the weight of everything he'd just set in motion. Outside, the world was still reeling from what had happened to his mother, but inside, Elijah already understood something far worse. What happened to Alma wasn't an isolated act. It was a symptom of something much deeper, something older, colder, and more entrenched than one arrogant man with a badge. It was institutional. He ran a hand across the rusted edge of a filing cabinet, dust lifting like memory. This wasn't the kind of corruption you could see in plain sight. It lived in file folders left untouched, in unsigned complaint forms, in resolved internally stamps and missing audio logs. Elijah had grown up in Ridgeview. He knew the people, knew the stories. But this rot was deeper than stories. It was documented, just not believed. Not yet. By 4:27, he'd summoned Lieutenant Carmen Desai, head of internal affairs and one of the sharpest minds in the department. Carmen didn't deal in politics or public relations. She dealt in facts, patterns, and consequences. She arrived carrying two things, a clipboard and a look that said, "Tell me everything." "I need an audit," Elijah said simply. "All disciplinary records, internal complaints, use of force reports, 10 years back." Carmen raised an eyebrow. 10? Every case, every report, every incident flagged and forgotten. She nodded. No questions, only action. By 5 o'clock, a folding table had been set up in the precinct basement, lit by a single overhead bulb that buzzed like a live wire. The air smelled like old paper and neglect. The room hadn't been used in years, not for anything official, just storage. Dust thick enough to write regrets into. Carmen brought 2 aides from IA and began sorting. Manila folders spilled from boxes labeled MZ. Each one represented a complaint filed by a citizen who believed something had gone wrong. Some were typed, others handwritten. Some were signed in shaky cursive, others anonymous. By 6:15, they had already logged 43 complaints that had never been followed up. Some were marked inconclusive. Some had no disposition at all. A few were stamped with the same red phrase again and again. No further action required. But Carmen saw it before Elijah even needed to ask. A pattern. "Look at this," she said, laying out 5 files side by side. Different officers, different years, but same outcome. No external interviews, no body cam review. Same language in the dismissal forms. Elijah leaned over the table, scanning them. "Suspect appeared agitated," Carmen read. "Complainant lacks credibility. Allegation does not warrant full investigation." Over and over. "Same supervisor signatures?" Carmen nodded. "Almost always." By 7:08, the list had grown to over 80 unresolved complaints. Excessive force, racial profiling, verbal intimidation, unlawful searches. But more chilling than what they found was what they didn't. Proper closure, transparency, or accountability. "This didn't start with Penrose," Carmen said, flipping through a 2017 file. "He's just the most visible." Elijah said nothing. He already knew. This wasn't about one man, one coffee cup, or even one victim. It was about a culture, carefully constructed and meticulously ignored. By 8:15, they broke to breathe. The room felt heavier than it had an hour earlier, as if truth itself had weight, and they were lifting it page by page. Elijah walked out onto the precinct balcony overlooking downtown Ridgeview. The crowd outside had begun to thin, but a core group remained. Still. Watchful? A woman held a sign that simply read, "How many more?" He stared at it for a long time. At 9:22, Carmen returned with a printed count. 183 unresolved complaints, she said, spanning 9 years, at least 30 repeat allegations. 17 different officers named more than once. Elijah looked at the stack of files spread across the folding tables. How many marked resolved internally? Almost all. And there it was. Not just negligence, not just laziness, intent, a systemic design to bury misconduct under paperwork and silence. The rot had not only been ignored, it had been preserved. "What's the earliest repeat complaint?" Elijah asked. Carmen pulled a folder from the bottom of the stack. Officer Dan Keller. 3 complaints between 2015 and 2017. 2 were for excessive force. 1 for falsified citation details. All dismissed. No follow-up. Elijah scanned the report. The language was clinical, detached. Complainant lacked supporting evidence. Officer's conduct within discretionary range. He set it down. Who signed off on it? Carmen answered without looking. Captain Roy Taggart. A long pause followed. Taggart was still with the department, still patrolling, still carrying a badge. "Start a red flag list," Elijah said. "Names, badge numbers, number of complaints, severity of allegations." Carmen nodded, already writing. "Add frequency of dismissal by supervisor," he added. "If there's overlap, I want it mapped." Carmen stopped writing, just for a moment, and looked at him. "You're not just doing damage control." "No," Elijah said. "I'm cleaning house." By 10:06, they had compiled a preliminary list. 6 officers flagged for repeated misconduct. 3 supervisors flagged for signing dismissals without investigation. 1 internal affairs officer who had approved all 3 of Penrose's past infractions. It was a map, not of mistakes, but of choices. By 10:41, Elijah called for backup servers to scan digital files for body cam uploads never reviewed. If the paper trail was this bad, the video trail could be worse. By 11:17, Carmen reported something stranger. Some of these complaints were logged, but never entered into the central database. Elijah frowned. Meaning? Meaning someone buried them before they ever had a chance to become real. And there it was again. Silence used as a tool. Omission as protection. He sat down slowly, staring at the wall of folders. The problem wasn't just individual officers. The problem was the scaffolding built around them. Every overlooked report, every dismissed voice, every file that ended with no further action. It wasn't just negligence. It was institutional survival. But now it was exposed, and it would never be ignored again. At 11:58 p.m., Elijah stood in the center of the archives room and said quietly, to no one in particular, "Tomorrow, we name it." Carmen looked up. "Name what?" He turned to her, eyes sharp and tired. "The truth." By 6:42 the next morning, the first person arrived. He was quiet. An older man in a windbreaker with a patched elbow and a cup of black coffee in his hand. He didn't carry a sign. He didn't shout. He simply stood on the sidewalk outside Ridgeview Police Department, facing the building like it owed him an answer. A few minutes later, a mother with 2 children joined him. She had a thermos in one hand and her daughter's fingers in the other. At 7:01, a college student arrived. Then 3 more. Then 5. By 7:20, the precinct steps were full, not with voices, with presence. Dozens stood shoulder to shoulder, each holding a cup, paper, ceramic, travel mugs filled with coffee. Steam curled into the cool morning air, rising like memory, like prayer, like warning. It wasn't a protest in the traditional sense. No megaphones, no chants, no news vans yet. But it was unmistakable. This was a reckoning in slow motion. By 8:10, Elijah Bryant watched them from his second-floor window, his hand still wrapped around a mug that had long gone cold. He didn't move, just stared, and counted. 37, then 50, then close to 80 people lining the precinct lawn, spilling over the curb, taking quiet sips from their cups, each one a silent echo of the moment his mother had endured. Her blouse soaked, her dignity untouched. He hadn't spoken to her since the night before. She still hadn't said a word. That silence, her silence, unraveled him more than the footage, more than the media, more than the internal backlash that now simmered in every hallway of his department. Alma Bryant, who had once taught him how to speak with purpose and restraint, now sat in her living room with hands folded and voice locked away somewhere unreachable. Elijah would rather have heard her scream. He turned from the window, jaw clenched, and walked back toward the archive room. Lieutenant Carmen Desai was already there, her team assembling rows of files and setting up a spreadsheet that now spanned 10 years of misconduct. The numbers were staggering. 183 unresolved complaints, 32 repeat offenders, 7 supervisors responsible for burying them all. But outside, that was the real story. By 9 o'clock, the crowd had grown. A high school marching band alumnus played a slow, mournful tune on a trumpet from the corner of the lot. A barista from Morning Light Café handed out free refills. There were no speeches, no slogans, just people, silent, watching, until a voice finally broke through. It came at 9:16. She stepped onto a milk crate with paint-stained sneakers, an oversized denim jacket, and a voice that didn't ask permission. Her name was Tiana Rose, 19 years old, local organizer, daughter of Ridgeview's East Side. She cleared her throat and held a simple sign above her head that read, "Still brewing," and then she spoke. "Y'all thought we were quiet because we didn't care. Because we didn't march, didn't scream, didn't burn nothing down. But you mistook our silence for peace." The crowd leaned in. Our silence wasn't peace. It was exhaustion. It was survival. It was the sound of generations being polite so they wouldn't get punished. But now? She paused. Her voice cracked, but didn't falter. Now you poured hot coffee on a grandmother and called it order. There was a rumble, not of dissent, but of recognition. Tiana raised her chin. She didn't yell, but we heard her anyway. So today, we speak. Not with fists, not with fire, but with our bodies in space, with our silence turned inside out, with coffee cups held like candles. This is our resistance. By the time she stepped down, the entire block was holding still again. But it wasn't passive. It was charged, like the air before lightning. At 9:45, national media arrived. Reporters tried to stir the crowd, asking questions, shoving mics toward people's faces. No one answered. Instead, a barista handed one of them a cup and said, "Drink it. Then maybe you'll understand." Inside the precinct, the tension was suffocating. Officers whispered behind doors. One patrolman muttered, "They'll forget in a week." Another rolled his eyes at the crowd outside. But not everyone was dismissive. Officer Reuben Reynolds, a 6-year veteran who'd once trained under Elijah, stepped into the archive room and quietly offered to help organize files. No speech, no bravado, just a nod. At 10:17, Elijah stood behind the front desk, watching the scene unfold through the glass doors. This wasn't just about Alma anymore. It wasn't even just about Jake Penrose. This was Ridgeview, laid bare. Its people weren't demanding justice. They were embodying it. They weren't calling for change. They were becoming it. And they hadn't even needed a microphone. Elijah's phone buzzed in his pocket. A message from Carmen. Another folder. Complaint from 2019, Officer Taggart again, buried, needs eyes. He didn't respond right away. Instead, he opened the front doors and stepped outside. The moment he appeared, the crowd didn't erupt. They didn't scatter. They simply turned toward him like sunflowers track the sun. Quiet, patient, unmoved. He stood on the top step, cup in hand, coat unbuttoned. And then, in the only way he knew how, Elijah Bryant spoke. Not loudly, just clearly. "I see you." That's all he said. And somehow it was enough. Because the people of Ridgeview had gathered not to be pacified, but to be acknowledged. And now they were. By 10:49, Tiana Rose posted a photo online. Elijah standing alone on the steps, coffee in one hand, crowd before him like a living wall of truth. She captioned it, "We showed up, and he didn't hide." Within an hour, it had over 100,000 shares. By 11:30, protesters began taping index cards to the station doors, each one handwritten. My son was profiled. My daughter was stopped for walking home at night. My uncle was never believed. One simply read, "Her name is Alma. Say it." Inside, Elijah stared at a wall of complaint folders stacked high like tombstones. Every one of them a story someone once tried to forget. But now they were seen. And Ridgeview was wide awake. At 6:42 the next morning, Chief Elijah Bryant stepped through the precinct's side door and walked into the heavy quiet of Ridgeview's awakening streets. The sun hadn't fully risen yet, but the sky was beginning to soften, bruised indigo turning gray, then gold at the edges. He carried no briefcase, no folder, just a single laminated page, taped flat inside a weatherproof sleeve. In his hand was a roll of clear tape and a thumbtack, worn smooth from use. The front doors of Ridgeview Police Department loomed ahead, still locked from the night before, but already flanked by flowers, index cards, and a dozen cold cups of coffee, tokens left behind by the silent protesters who had gathered and returned, day after day. Elijah moved past them without speaking, heart steady, purpose fixed. When he reached the precinct's bulletin board, the same one visible in the now viral video of his mother, he unrolled the tape, smoothed the paper against the glass, and pressed it there for the entire city to see. At the top, bold black letters read, "Officers under internal review." Below, 6 names, 6 badge numbers, 6 statuses, suspended pending investigation. Each entry was accompanied by the nature of the complaint: excessive force, fabrication of evidence, racial profiling, failure to report misconduct, obstruction. All logged, documented, and previously shelved. Until now. And beneath it all, handwritten in Elijah's steady pen, "No justice without sunlight." He stepped back, eyes scanning the board. It wasn't just a list. It was a ledger, a reckoning, a declaration that silence would no longer shield misconduct. Behind him, the first civilian of the day approached, a woman in scrubs on her way to the hospital. She paused, coffee in hand, and stared at the list. Her eyes didn't widen. She didn't gasp. She just nodded, once, then walked away. By 7:30, the photo of the list was online. By 8:04, it had gone viral. Again. The reactions came quickly. Some quietly supportive, some ferocious. The Ridgeview Police Union issued a statement by 8:33, condemning the public posting as reckless, inflammatory, and in direct violation of procedural fairness. They accused Elijah of weaponizing transparency for political gain and sacrificing departmental morale to appease a moment of outrage. By 9:07, anonymous accounts began circulating edited photos of Elijah with doctored quotes. One graphic read, "He's targeting white officers." Another claimed falsely, "No evidence, just vengeance." The local fraternal order of police called for an emergency meeting, and inside the department, the air shifted from silence to whispers. By 10:15, Officer Miles Becker, a 10-year veteran, refused to log into his squad car's dash cam software. "If we're all suspects now," he muttered, "maybe we just don't show up." At roll call, 2 officers turned their backs when Elijah entered. One sergeant pretended not to hear him speak, but Elijah noticed. He noticed everything. By 10:52, someone had defaced the bulletin board. A sheet of printer paper taped over the list with the words, "Mob rule doesn't build justice." Elijah tore it down without a word and replaced the list with a fresh copy. But not all the winds were against him. At 11:19, Detective Ron Castillo, a 22-year veteran with silver at his temples and a record clean enough to shine, knocked on Elijah's office door. He carried no folder, no form, just resolve. "I read the list," he said. Elijah nodded once, wary. "And I support it." Elijah looked up, the tension in his shoulders quieting for the first time in hours. "You sure about that?" he asked. "Because it won't be popular." Castillo sat down slowly. "Popularity never solved anything. I've seen those names for years. I've written reports that never got reviewed. I've seen cases close faster than we could finish writing them. You're doing what should have been done a decade ago." A long silence passed between them. "Just tell me where I can help," Castillo added. And in that moment, Elijah realized something vital. Not everyone inside these walls had been silent because they were complicit. Some had been waiting, watching, for someone else to make the first move. And now that he had, a few were finally stepping forward, even if it was just one at a time. By noon, Castillo was helping Carmen Desai review old use-of-force cases tied to the officers on the list. He flagged language patterns, terms like resisted verbal command and suspect appeared erratic that had been used over and over again to justify unnecessary force. They began mapping those phrases across years of reports. By 1:30, Elijah's inbox was flooded. Some messages read, "Traitor." Others read, "Thank you." One simply said, "You missed a name." He starred that one. At 2:05, a local radio host called Elijah a radical in uniform and accused him of sowing distrust between citizens and law enforcement. Within 10 minutes, countercallers were flooding the station's phone lines. Pastors, teachers, barbers, small business owners. "He's not dividing us," one woman said. "He's showing us who already did." By 3:16, Tiana Rose returned to the precinct steps with a portable speaker. This time, she played a recording. Not a chant, not music. It was a montage of real Ridgeview residents reading complaint excerpts aloud. "He shoved me for not answering fast enough. She said she was pulled over 7 times in 3 months. They laughed when I asked for a supervisor." The sound carried through the precinct windows like smoke. Inside, officers stirred uneasily, but Elijah stood still. By 5:02, another name was added to the list. An anonymous tip. A matched complaint from 2 years ago. Elijah made sure the file was verified, signed, and posted. 6 names became 7. And with each addition, the tension twisted tighter. But so did the resolve. That night, at 7:24, Elijah walked the quiet corridors of the precinct. Every officer who passed him offered something. A glare, a nod, silence, or averted eyes. When he reached the bulletin board, he checked the list. Still intact, still visible beneath the words, "No justice without sunlight." Just before midnight, Carmen sent him a new report. A 30-page document mapping internal complaint patterns, officers who signed off on each other's files, command-level cover-ups, recycled language. At the bottom, she'd written, "The rot's not just in the field, it's in the frame." Elijah read it once, then again. And then he stared at the bulletin board photo posted online earlier that morning, the one of his hand pinning up the list. It didn't feel brave. It felt necessary, because justice, in Ridgeview, had lived in the dark for too long. And now it had a name. 6 of them. And counting. At 8:13 the next morning, a plain manila envelope arrived at Chief Elijah Bryant's office. No return address, no postmark. Just his name, E. Bryant, scrawled across the front in rushed, angled handwriting. It was too light to be suspicious, too quiet to be loud. But the moment it landed on his desk, something in Elijah's chest tightened, like the air had shifted again, just slightly, but unmistakably. He'd been in the job long enough to know that truth rarely knocks. It slides in like this, wrapped in plain paper and silence. He didn't open it right away. Instead, he stared at it for a long minute, as if it might whisper its contents if given the chance. When he finally peeled the flap open, 2 things slid out. A single-page internal report, dated March 10th, 4 years ago, and a slim, silver disc labeled in black marker. Crane, March 10th, 11:48 p.m. Crane. Sergeant Theo Crane. Not on the list. Not flagged in the initial audit. A name that had appeared in a few reports, but nothing that screamed back louder than the rest. Until now. Elijah reached for the precinct's oldest desktop, the only one in the entire department that still had a functioning disk drive. He inserted the CD. The screen flickered to life. No title sequence, no sound, just raw footage. A Ridgeview patrol car pulled to the shoulder of a dark road. Timestamp, March 10th, 11:48 p.m. A black sedan sat idling in the breakdown lane. No lights, no movement. Then came the flashlight beam, aggressive, shaking slightly, followed by Sergeant Crane stepping into frame. No audio, just his mouth moving fast, sharp gestures, body language stiff and combative. The car door opened. A black teenage boy stepped out, hands already raised. Crane shoved him against the car, hard. No struggle, no resistance. The kid didn't even flinch, just looked terrified. Then, from the passenger side, another door opened. A girl, no older than 15, stepped out, trembling. Crane whipped around, yelled something, then reached toward the dash cam. Static, then black. Elijah sat frozen, breath caught between fury and something older. Something like grief. He rewound it, frame by frame, freezing on the girl's face just before the cut. Eyes wide, mouth slightly open. Her fear immortalized in pixels. He pulled the report next, scanning it. Filed by Officer Trainee. Complaint, use of force, evidence tampering. Outcome, dismissed internally. Reason, minor procedural inconsistency. Subject combative. No further action. Signed off by then Captain Roy Taggart. Of course, Elijah stood, jaw clenched, and walked the disk straight to internal affairs. Reopen the Crane file, he said to Lieutenant Carmen Desai. Effective immediately. She looked up, startled. Crane wasn't flagged. He is now. Within the hour, Crane was called into the review room. He didn't ask why, he didn't even sit. He walked in with the posture of a man who thought the storm had passed and he'd stayed dry. Elijah placed the still frame on the table, the one with the girl's face frozen in horror. You recognize this? Crane blinked, calculating. It was a traffic stop. The kid had no taillights, was acting suspicious. No charges filed, no citation written, no report beyond the one your trainee submitted, and it was buried. Crane shrugged. Nothing happened. You destroyed dash cam footage, Carmen said, her voice low and precise. Or tried to. It glitched. Equipment malfunctions all the time. We pulled the maintenance logs, Elijah replied. No malfunctions reported on that unit before or after that date. Crane's jaw twitched. His hands stayed at his sides, but something behind his eyes faltered. "You're being suspended effective immediately," Elijah said. "This case is being reopened and referred to the state for external review." Crane turned, knocking the chair behind him. "You're making a mistake." "No," Elijah said. "I'm correcting one." By 2:15 that afternoon, the precinct bulletin board had been updated again. A new name: Sergeant Theo Crane. Status: suspended pending investigation. Case: use of force, evidence destruction. And beneath it, the same handwritten line: no justice without sunlight. The photo was online within 17 minutes. And this time, it didn't just spark outrage. It unlocked memory. By 3:42, a young woman named Zariah King stepped into the Ridgeview Community Center during a scheduled town hall forum. She walked past folding chairs filled with residents, past a row of local reporters, and took the mic without waiting to be called. "I know that tape," she said. Silence. "I know that boy. He's my brother. His name is Jamari. He was 16 then." Gasps rippled through the room. "He was driving me home after a school fundraiser. We were laughing about how bad the music was. And then, that flashlight hit us." Her voice trembled, but her spine stayed straight. Crane shoved him, called him a thug, said we were loitering. Jamari didn't even talk back. He was just quiet. She took a breath. Then he told me to get out. I was crying. I thought we were going to die. And then the footage cut. The report said Jamari was combative, said I was hostile, said there was no proof. Tears welled in her eyes. And so we buried it. Like we buried everything. Our voices, our hope. Because no one believed us. She looked out at the crowd, eyes blazing now. But now there's tape. Now there's a list. Now there's someone in that precinct who doesn't pretend silence is justice. She raised the printed still from the footage, holding it high. We were buried, but now we rise. The room erupted, not with noise, but with movement. People stood, some with fists raised, others with hands over hearts. Tiana Rose reached for Zariah's hand, held it aloft like a banner. In that moment, the girl once frozen in fear had become a symbol of something bigger than pain. Proof that the forgotten had not been erased. By 5 o'clock, the clip of Zariah's speech had over 200,000 views. Zariah Speaks trended by dusk. And in Ridgeview, the question wasn't what else is buried. It was, who's going to dig it up next? Elijah watched the footage alone in his office. Then he picked up the envelope the disc had arrived in. Still blank. Still anonymous. But it had done its job. It had brought light. He pressed his hand against the bulletin board later that night, staring at Crane's name. 7. 7 names now! And still counting. By 8:27 the following morning, the storm Elijah Bryant had long anticipated finally broke. Not in the streets, not in the precinct, but inside the marble-tiled echo chamber of Ridgeview City Hall. The motion was introduced quietly, almost politely. Proposal 14B. Immediate suspension of independent audit authority by Chief of Police Elijah Bryant. On the surface, it sounded procedural, administrative. But to Elijah, and to everyone paying attention, it was something else entirely. It was war. The same morning that Zariah King's tear-streaked speech passed 1 million views online, a coalition of council members, 3 of them longtime allies of the Ridgeview Police Union, gathered in a closed-door session to fast-track the motion. Their language was slippery. Restoring internal stability, preserving due process, protecting officer morale. But beneath the paper-thin phrasing was a single, trembling truth. Elijah's reforms were working, and they were scared. By 9:04, Mayor Daphne Kwan, once the picture of political neutrality, called Elijah into her office. He arrived in silence. Quan stood by the window, her back to the door, arms crossed as if holding herself still. Her voice didn't break the air. It sliced it. "They're calling it overreach," she said. "Saying your list is a witch hunt. Saying you're destabilizing the department." "I'm exposing it," Elijah said. "They want to vote today. Motion's already on the docket." Elijah didn't flinch. "Then let them vote." Quan turned slowly, eyes sharp, exhausted. "I want to back you, Elijah. I do. But I need more than names on a board. More than a viral video and crowd pressure. I need proof. Unshakable. Undeniable. Something I can walk into that chamber with and dare them to deny." He said nothing at first. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out a black binder. Thicker than most legal briefs, its pages worn at the edges, corners tagged with sticky notes and tabs. The cover bore no title. Only a single label. Internal Patterns of Misconduct. 10-year analysis. 76 pages. Reports. Timelines. Officer complaints. Supervisory sign-offs. Infractions dismissed without external review. Statistical patterns of disproportionate stops, searches, and uses of force against Black and Latino residents. Overlapping names. Repeated phrases. Evidence that misconduct wasn't incidental. It was patterned, protected, and passed down like a grim inheritance. Elijah placed the binder on the mayor's desk. "That's your proof." Quan stared at it for a beat too long. Then she opened to the first page. By 10:23, word of the binder had leaked to 2 journalists waiting outside City Hall. By 10:39, a reporter tweeted a single sentence from the cover sheet. This report identifies an institutional failure spanning a decade. The cost has been silence. The toll has been lives. By 11:02, the chamber filled. Folded chairs for public observers. A narrow bench of city lawyers. News cameras in the back. The atmosphere was heavy with something unspoken. Tension wrapped in protocol. Elijah sat in the second row, alone. Not in uniform. Just a man in a dark coat with his hands folded in his lap and a folder full of truth beneath his chair. When his name was called, he stood. The council members barely looked up. Councilwoman Jeanette Moran began, voice overly crisp. "Chief Bryant, it is our concern that your current audit procedures bypass traditional oversight and may be in violation of departmental autonomy." "Autonomy," Elijah said, cool and calm. "Or immunity." Gasps stirred in the room. Moran pressed on. "The union has expressed significant concern." "I'm not employed by the union," Elijah said. "I serve the people of Ridgeview." More murmurs. Then Quan stood, and the room went still. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't gesture. She simply placed Elijah's binder on the podium and said, "For those of you calling this audit political, I urge you to read what's inside. 34 officers with repeated misconduct. 7 captains who signed dismissals without review. Dozens of citizens unheard, unseen, unprotected." She turned slowly to face the full chamber. "This is not political. This is institutional. And if oversight can't bear exposure, then it was never oversight to begin with." A pause. Heavy. Final. Then she added, almost softly, "If your concern is morale, then I ask, what kind of morale is worth protecting? The kind built on silence, or the kind earned through truth?" By 1:27, the motion went to vote. 5 hands rose against it. 2 abstained. The motion failed, and with it, so did the last official attempt to stop the reforms. Elijah didn't cheer. He didn't smile. He simply stood, nodded once to Quan, and left the chamber through the side door as news crews scrambled to follow. By 3:10 that afternoon, a copy of the report was posted publicly. Online, on the department's website, in printed form at the public library. Laminated copies were even taped to the windows of Morning Light Café, and beneath every version, a single line was printed. "This is what sunlight looks like." Inside the precinct, backlash still simmered. The union called the report inflammatory. A group of officers began whispering about walkouts. One captain threatened legal action. But they weren't the loudest voices anymore. Outside, the people were speaking louder, through presence, through persistence, through a faith that hadn't been restored, but reborn. By 4:25, Tiana Rose read from the report on a live stream, page by page. Her voice didn't waver once. "This," she said to the camera, "isn't a list of shame. It's a map, a trail of truth. And we're following it all the way through." By 5 o'clock, the list on the bulletin board grew again. Officer number 8. Complaint? Falsified witness statement. Filed 3 years ago. Dismissed 24 hours after submission. Supervisor Crane. Elijah updated the list himself, taped it up, then stepped back and breathed. The political storm had passed, for now, but the winds had changed direction. The air in Ridgeview was different, sharper, cleaner, lit from within, and there was no going back. It was 7:42 on a Sunday morning when Alma Bryant finally spoke. The house was quiet, steeped in that soft early light that filters through sheer curtains like forgiveness. Outside, the world had changed. Laws challenged, names exposed, systems rattled. But inside Alma's living room, time had been holding its breath. For days, she hadn't said more than a whisper. Not to the reporters camped at the curb. Not to the activists who left flowers and thank you notes at her door. Not even to Elijah. But this morning, Malik Garner, the 16-year-old who had captured it all, her silence, her soaking blouse, her refusal to flinch, stood in the doorway with a gift. "I didn't know what else to bring," he said, holding out a framed photo. It was a still from the video. Alma seated, coffee dripping from her collarbone, eyes fixed forward like stone carved into human grace. He had printed it on his school's library printer, taped the edges with black electrical tape, and placed it in the cheapest frame he could find. It shook a little in his hands as he offered it. "I didn't mean to go viral," he added. I couldn't look away." Alma took the photo gently, running her fingertips across the image, not as if remembering it, but as if acknowledging a version of herself the world had seen before she was ready. Then, after a long pause, she looked at Malik and said quietly, "You didn't film violence. You filmed truth refusing to kneel." Malik blinked, lips parting slightly. Then he nodded. Outside, the air was full of motion. People walking past with flyers, city workers repainting faded crosswalks, teenagers chalking quotes from the town hall meetings onto the sidewalks. Alma's name was everywhere, but her words, until that moment, had been nowhere. Now, one sentence echoed across Ridgeview. That afternoon, Elijah stood at the station's front lobby bulletin board, the same board that had carried the first list of names, the one that now held 9. He pressed a laminated card onto the glass. This time, there were no badge numbers, no case summaries, just a message. To every citizen ignored, every story buried, every silence mistaken for consent. "I see you. I hear you. We will not forget." Chief Elijah Bryant. He didn't call for a press conference. He didn't tweet it. He let it speak for itself. By 2:30 p.m., photos of the card were circulating online. People shared them alongside stories, snapshots of injustice, brief videos of their own moments of erasure. A man in Milwaukee posted, "They called my father aggressive for asking why he was being pulled over. He never raised his voice. They still broke his wrist." A teacher in Atlanta wrote, "The girl in that video? She's all of us. Every time we swallowed pain to stay safe." And in Ridgeview, something extraordinary began to happen. People came to the precinct not in protest, but in pilgrimage. They stood before the board, hands pressed to the glass like it was sacred. They left folded notes. Some wrote names. Others left receipts, citations, report copies, each one a breadcrumb of buried truth, finally given daylight. Elijah watched from the shadows of the lobby, a quiet sentinel. He no longer needed a list to shake the system. The people were doing it now, and they had his blueprint. Later that evening, a young girl no older than 10 stood in the front row of a community Q&A, her hand raised high and trembling. When the microphone reached her, she didn't ask about policy or patrol changes or the audit. She looked straight at Elijah and said, "Did your mom get justice?" The room froze. Elijah knelt so he could look her in the eye, and he answered softly, "She got a voice, and now, so do you." The child blinked, nodding slowly. She may not have understood all the weight in those words, but one day she would. By nightfall, the rain began again. Not a storm this time, just a soft, soaking drizzle that cleaned more than it ruined. The chalk on the sidewalks blurred, running down into the gutters like tears, like memory, like truth. Inside the precinct, Elijah sat in his office, the binder of misconduct cases now reduced to a spreadsheet, a living document, still growing. 9 names had become 12. 5 resignations had turned into 7. 3 officers were cooperating with internal affairs. Change wasn't done, it was just getting smarter. Outside his office door, Lieutenant Carmen Desai pinned a new notice to the internal board. Civilian Oversight Committee, applications open. Another promise kept, and across town, Alma sat by her window. The frame Malik gave her resting on the table beside a small vase of wildflowers. Her TV was off, her phone untouched. She didn't need to see what the world was saying. She had already lived it. She'd once told Elijah that dignity isn't something you wear. It's something you carry, especially when no one helps you hold it. Now, Ridgeview was helping her hold it. At 10:45 that night, Elijah stood in the rain outside the station, watching the last candlelight vigil flicker to a close. Tiana Rose passed by, soaked but smiling. "They're calling it the Alma Doctrine," she joked, nodding toward the sign on the window. "Might want to get that trademarked." Elijah laughed. Soft, the kind that shakes loose the weight in your chest without anyone noticing. "You staying in the fight?" Tiana asked. "Especially now," he said, and with that, she left him in the rain, one hand raised in farewell, the other clutching a soaked stack of tomorrow's flyers. When Elijah finally turned to go inside, he left one last message behind. Not on paper, not online. He etched it with his presence, in his walk, in the open door he left for others to follow. Because the legacy of Alma's stillness wasn't just what it exposed, it was what it ignited. In just 9 days, one quiet act inside a small-town cafe unraveled a decade of silence, exposing the truth that too many Americans already knew. Injustice doesn't always scream. It often whispers behind uniforms, in back rooms, through sealed files and buried complaints. Alma Bryant, a 67-year-old retired librarian, didn't fight back with her fists. She didn't shout. She didn't even speak. For days. But her stillness was louder than sirens. And her dignity sparked a movement that shook a city to its core. From Malik's video at 10:45 a.m. to Elijah's final message on the precinct board, Ridgeview's story reminds us that change begins when we stop looking away, when we believe the quiet ones, when we dig into the archives instead of waiting for someone else to. This wasn't just about one officer or one department. It was about patterns, protection, and power. It was about what happens when citizens choose presence over comfort, when teenagers document what adults try to ignore, and when truth finally finds a microphone. From Zariah King's trembling testimony to Mayor Daphne Kwan's turning point, every voice mattered. and so does yours. You don't need a badge or a podium to fight for justice. You need eyes that stay open, hands that hold power accountable, and the courage to speak, even if your voice shakes. Alma's legacy is not just a story. It's a mirror held up to every town, every courthouse, every classroom, every American. Ask yourself, what's been buried in your backyard? Who have you walked past in silence? What can you uncover, name, and refuse to ignore? Justice doesn't come from institutions alone. It comes from communities. And it starts with remembering that the quietest people often carry the clearest truth. So if this story stirred something in you, if it reminded you of your mother, your neighbor, your child, don't scroll past. Like the video. Share it with someone who needs to see it. Subscribe to the channel for more stories that don't flinch. Because every click amplifies the message. Every share builds the echo. And every one of us has a choice. To look away or to lean in. It's not just Alma's story anymore. It's ours. And we have work to do.